How long should we rest between sets in the gym? Hey, everybody, I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today, mainly because I had a regular follower ask a question and say, could you do a video on this topic? And I kind of told him, look, this will be like a really short video. He's like, yeah, but there's going to be, a lot of questions. What are the downsides to different rest times? And it's like, okay, I guess we can explain that a little bit. Normally, I tell people, all right, here's the rule. This way, normally it'd be a short video. Rest as long as you need between sets. That's it. Okay? Let me state that again. Rest as long as you need between sets. Now, the downside to that, you could be in the gym a really, really long time if you overdo it. And I guess that's the biggest downside. People don't want to spend 2-3 hours in the gym. Okay, and that's a valid point. So I can understand why a lot of people start saying, hey, what is our minimum rest times? But let's briefly discuss, what research has shown and what we know from the lab and everything else. There are no downsides to long rest times unless you are trying to get a lot of conditioning from your training. Okay, but if you're trying to do a lot of conditioning from your training, you should probably be doing pretty high reps and a lot of big exercises. Okay. So again, keep that part in perspective. And generally, we are lifting weights for the purposes of building muscle mass. That's why we do it. And we could make the argument that lifting weights isn't always the best form of calorie burn. But there's newer data saying, hey, maybe that idea is wrong. But generally, we're trying to build muscle. And when you look at some of the studies, what they found was that when it was compared to shorter rest times, longer rest times, up about 3 minutes is what they define as long, at least 3 minutes, between sets, produced the most muscle growth. All right. Let me state that again. Longer rest times, at least 3 minutes, produce slightly more muscle growth if sets were taken very, very close to failure or to failure. All right. What's the things that the researchers noted? That when rest times got shorter in comparisons and muscle growth went down, we saw a drop-off set to set in performance. In other words, the rest times that tended to produce rather than the minutes, one of the trends that's been found is how much performance did you lose between sets? Okay. The more performance you lost on the second or third set relative to the first, the less muscle you gain. Thus, the implication is set-to-set performance does matter. And we also need to be clear, these were not big differences in muscle growth. They were small, but they were just big enough to measure. Now, that being said, there's a whole other topic of just simply increasing volume with shorter rest times. That's also been studied, and apparently that can bridge the gap. And in other words, if a person wants to pursue slightly higher volumes of training, they can take those rest times really short. But if we're trying to minimize volume, like you were saying, I want to gain as much muscle as I possibly can for every set that I do. So if you're trying to make efficient use of your work, guess what? Long rest times produce the most growth. In other words, resting long enough that you don't lose much strength, because you're going to lose some. In other words, if you're getting really close to failure, like let's say you're doing an 11 rep max, let's say a 12 rep max, and you're doing sets of 10, you won't lose any performance from the first to the second set unless your break is really, really short. All right. If even at 3 minutes, you're still probably not going to lose anything on the third. But if you do enough total sets, you're going to start losing performance. You start trying to do 6, 8, 10. You try to do 10 sets with that. All right. Your breaks, in order to maintain performance, they're going to start being 8, 9, 10 minutes apart. Hey, that 10 sets could take you a really, really long time. So you will eventually lose performance. And the more you train, obviously, the longer the breaks would need to be to maintain it. But if you want to keep set-to-set muscle growth, you would have to. All right? So something to think about too is, are we willing to accept a diminished return? Are we going to shift exercises? Okay. What are we doing? But generally speaking, if you want your volumes to be low to moderate, minimum of 3 minutes, right? Minimum of 3 minutes. But what's also been noted in some of the research that's looked at this, and I've seen like Dr. Krager point this out, if sets are kept low, muscle growth goes up pretty quick as long as volume is raised. In other words, if you do more total training volume, it will bridge the gap as far as reaching that maximum hypertrophy. And that makes sense because with just enough volume thrown in there, we're going to keep fatiguing the upper threshold fibers. They're eventually going to reactivate on some of the sets, even if they're too fatigued on some of the sets. Right? Does that make sense? In other words, if you just come in and do a bunch and you keep the density high, well, that will produce pretty dang good muscle growth too. It also burns through a lot of calories, keep conditioning higher. You will probably see less neural drive from it, but it's also going to be, you're going to be moving a lot. It's going to be, a lot more cardio feel to your workout. But will it produce the same muscle growth? If we go off the data we have, probably so. So that's the other question too. How high of reps and how many sets are you trying to do? In other words, the people who are trying to do really much, much higher volumes because that's their goal, that's how they want to train, it would make sense to do that. Because otherwise it gets you out of the gym quicker, but you are going to be moving a lot more. And please note, these are simply different training styles. Like if you're going to compare these two extremes, these are just slightly different training styles. They both probably produce pretty similar results, as long as you are training hard and consistent. And so what I tend to recommend for people is a combination of the two somewhere. So all your heavier stuff, your big movements, probably keep those rest times long enough to keep that performance really high. Okay? 3 minutes or longer. And then if you want to get to all your pump work, you can do a bunch of pump work with shorter breaks and get a lot of density in near the end. I almost recommend doing this for the best of both worlds. It tends to work pretty good. But to really answer the question though, how long should your rest times be? Well, as long as they need to be to maintain performance on exercises to where we're moving any substantial weight. On a lot of your pump work, probably doesn't matter. You can take them as short as you want and just get a really good pump and do a bunch of sets and a bunch of reps. I would not, however, recommend a drug-free lifter train exclusively in the second manner. That is recommended for the back half of the workout. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.